Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Haverdank, and I serve Calvin here as the Director of Alumni Engagement. And thank you for taking the time again to come out this morning. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast, and sorry to interrupt the table conversation, but I trust that you will make great connections here this morning, both now and after our presentation. It's just so good again to have everybody back here in person. And I know this is our second time or third in person again, but it's just great to see so many familiar faces, and glad you're all here. So before we begin this morning, I do want to just take a quick moment to kind of recognize a special moment in Calvin's history. I am delighted, and we are so glad that President Michael Leroy could join us here this morning for this presentation. And as I trust most of you know, President Leroy is wrapping up his 10-year career here at Calvin later this spring and summer. And so as we have, a presidential transition happening now over the summer, we do want to take a moment to thank Michael Leroy and his wife Andrea for their wonderful 10 years here at Calvin University. We're grateful for all of the time and effort and care that they have displayed here at Calvin, and so many amazing projects and initiatives that we've seen develop over the past 10 years, and seeds for wonderful programs to come in the future were planted in the last 10 years. So I just want to recognize Michael and thank him for his time and his wife's time here at Calvin, and just ask that you join me in a round of applause. So now I am very excited to welcome you here for what is our next installment in our Executive Breakfast Series. This will be our final meeting for this academic year. But the Executive Breakfast Series is co-sponsored again by the Calvin Alumni Association and our friends at the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business. Our goal with these talks is to feature timely and interesting discussions around issues that intersect both Calvin alumni and those here in the business community. And we're going to continue on our theme of the future of everything. Many of you have been to several of these in the past, but we've covered some fascinating topics recently, such as the future of driving, the future of sports, most recently the future of the office. And those are all led by Calvin alumni experts in those fields. If you didn't know, we do record these presentations, and they are all available on our Calvin alumni website. If you look for events, Executive Breakfast Series, the future of the office is up there now. So if you wanted to catch all of those, they are there. So please do go ahead and enjoy those replays. But today, we are very excited to learn more about the topic called the future of the movies. We have a 1999 graduate with us this morning. J.D. Lokes is here to talk about the movies. J.D. was a business and philosophy major here at Calvin and earned his MBA at the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. J.D. was raised in a long-standing family business that operates movie theaters and other businesses in Michigan. J.D. is the president of Studio C, which is the parent brand for Celebration Cinema, Showspan, Studio Park, and several other businesses. So following J.D.'s talks, as always, we'll have Professor Bob Ames, the director for Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, will moderate a Q&A session with J.D. So please join me this morning in welcoming J.D. Lokes.
Good morning, everybody. I chuckle a little bit every time someone asks me to speak at Calvin. I believe that Speech 101 was my lowest grade at Calvin. And every time I come back, I'm hoping they're going to revise my transcripts because I can do a better job, but, we'll see. Let's see. Wait for the input to come on here. I chuckle, or I think that when Bob asked me to speak about the future of the movies, the question most people are really asking is there going to be a future for movie theaters? Are you guys going to survive this? And I want to answer that question this morning. The response is, we're cautiously optimistic. And that completes my prepared remarks. If you have any questions, just kidding, Bob. I came with my own 3 questions. There's three questions that I get asked really regularly. I picked the top three because I thought a 25-minute sermon with three major talking points would be a very familiar format to this room. The three questions that I get asked most frequently are, what's up with the whole streaming thing? In other words, is Netflix killing your business? Second is, what's happening or what's keeping you up at night? Spoiler alert, it's not Netflix. And the third is, what are you doing to stay sexy? Not like that. What are we doing as an industry in order to appeal to the next generation of moviegoers? And so I also threw in a bonus question. It's, are the studios even releasing any new movies? But I'll acknowledge that this is really just a shameless plug for all of the movies that I expect you to watch over the next 3 months. So we'll conclude with that. So the streaming question, and this really started popping up around December of 2020 or so with headlines like this. Warner Brothers will release all of its new 2021 movies simultaneously on HBO Max. Ooh, that can't be good. So this has become a really emerging topic that I think a lot of people are talking about. What is the impact of streaming services on movie theaters? What is that going to look like for the business model as it evolves? And I think that there's a little bit of context that's important to understand here. This was a conversation that predated the pandemic. With the advent of Netflix, Disney was deep into development of Disney+, Hulu, lots of other streaming services. We're now in the midst of what's being called the streaming wars. There are about 11 different significant players, still led by Netflix. Disney's on their heels, HBO, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Peacock. They're all trying to do everything that they possibly can to gobble up market share in streaming. And one of the reasons for that is that they're trying to find alternative revenue streams for their business model, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But there's also a shift on Wall Street where companies that are being traded as tech companies are trading at much higher multiples than companies that are being traded as media companies. And so they're all trying to get into the tech space. And then we've got tech players like Amazon Prime and Apple that are also getting into this space. In fact, they're trying so hard, I find it actually a little bit ironic that when you pull up a story about HBO Max, there's an ad next to it for Prime Video. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about. But that in and of itself doesn't necessarily concern me a whole lot. And the reason for that is this is what the data actually shows us. You can see about 5 years or so of history in the evolution of streaming platforms. We call them, streaming is really shorthand for subscription video on demand, which is the technical term. And you can see over the last 5 years, the last bar there is actually a 2026 projection. They are really taking off. But at the same time, we're looking at a history there, and until we hit the pandemic in 2020, of also increasing theatrical box office. And I think that what this data shows us, this positive correlation, is that there's really a lot of room here for all of us to play. The streaming services at home don't really impact us the way that people expect that they would. In fact, what we're actually finding, what the data is showing in other studies, is that the people who are watching the most streaming at home are actually the exact same people who are watching the most movies in the movie theaters. And so we think that there's a lot of space for all of us to play. And the other piece of interesting history here is that this is not new to us. In the 1980s, everyone was predicting the end of the movie theaters as a result of the advent of the VCR. And they thought with the ability to watch movies at home, no one was going to go to a movie theater anymore. Well, everybody was wrong. The reality was that was the best thing that ever happened to our industry. And the reason for that was it created this auxiliary revenue stream for the studios that pumped a lot more money into Hollywood, that allowed them to create a lot more content that allowed us to actually build bigger theaters and scale up and have more movies to play. And the same thing is happening now. So Disney is able to build upon its Disney Plus platform, and those who are familiar with the Marvel franchise know that they've launched about 4 or 5 new series highlighting different Marvel characters. And we don't necessarily benefit directly from that in the theater business, but we do benefit indirectly, as evidenced by this. So Spider-Man opens in December this year. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. Spider-Man opens as the 3rd highest grossing movie of all time, and is, I think for the run, will probably end up pretty much in that same spot, certainly in the top 5. A phenomenal success. And so they're able to build on these characters, build on these storylines in a way in which people are watching at home, and then clearly they want to show up and see it in the theaters. And in case you think this is a one-hit wonder, this is the news from this past weekend. Fandango's reporting some record-breaking advance ticket sales for Doctor Strange. This is a movie that doesn't open for another month and already has over $200 million of sales in the box office, which is a phenomenal success. It's tracking to be nearly as successful as Spider-Man. So all of the data is nice and all of that, but the real reason that I'm not concerned about where we're going with streaming is I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what business we're in. We say that our business exists to create space where story happens. What do I mean by that? I was 12 years old, and my dad took me to see Back to the Future 2. And if you remember this movie, it ends on a cliffhanger. Marty's stuck in 1955. Doc Brown just disappeared. He's on a dark, rainy street all alone. Some government officials show up that turn out to be from the post office and deliver him a letter that says, "We've been waiting 70 years to give you this." And then the movie ends. And truth be told, that's not what I remember about this experience. In fact, I had to look that part up yesterday. What I remember was driving home with my dad after the movie. And I'm 12 years old, and we had both just enjoyed this movie. We were talking about all the plot points. We were talking about what might happen in the next installment. We started to have a really nerdy dialogue about the mechanics of time travel and how that would work. And I remember that feeling, for the first time that I recall in my life, a feeling like my dad and I were peers. We were buddies. He was treating me in a conversation as if I was an adult, not the typical parent-child relationship. Now I've been working with my dad for 20 years side by side, and we've worked through a lot of complex business problems. We've worked through a lot of stressful situations, particularly in the last couple of years. And it's in those tough moments in particular that I'm able to call back exactly how I felt in that car on the drive home at that moment, saying, that's what we're trying to create here in our relationship. Now, when I ask people, and I do this often, tell me a meaningful experience you've had watching Netflix at home. If you have a response, it's usually about content. It's usually something like, oh, I loved Ted Lasso. It's hilarious. And it is. I love Ted Lasso. But it's usually about content. When I ask people to tell me a meaningful experience they've had going to the movies, it almost never is, or certainly the content takes a back seat to a story about you and what's going on in your life and what's going on with the friend group that you're with. It has to do with the date that you went on, or the school group that you attended with, or the tradition that you had with a group of friends, or the time that all of you and your friends dressed up in Harry Potter gear to go to Fantastic Beasts this Friday. Rick, I'm looking at you. And those are the sorts of stories that we tell about going to the movies. In other words, our relationship with the home market is very similar to the relationship between grocery stores and restaurants. Yeah, you can get a meal at both places, but it's not really about the meal when you go to a restaurant. It's about the fact that you want to go out, get off your couch, and be with people and have a different kind of conversation. So that answers kind of the streaming question. We'll move on to the insomnia question. What keeps me up at night? What are the biggest challenges that we're facing? And as I said, it's not really streaming. Our business is recovering. I want to be very clear that when Disney releases Black Widow day and date in movie theaters and on streaming, it does actually have about a 30 to 50% impact on the number of people that will show up to watch Black Widow or Dune. But the net result of that, I should add, is that most of the studios have now said, now that we've had a chance to experiment, now that we've had a chance to see what this landscape looks like, we've never had a more captive audience in the home than over the last 2 years. We've got record enrollment in our subscription services, and we think we need movie theaters. And so they've all now pretty much committed to going back to, at a minimum, a 45-day window between a theatrical release and a home release, which we think is probably just fine. So the things that are actually keeping me up at night are three. You can see this three theme, probably from my evangelical roots. Number one, people. And what I mean by this is my own office team and what we're struggling with. I probably should have attended the last breakfast series on the topic of, maybe I'll look it up online, on the topic of the future of the office. But I would have put our culture as a team prior to the pandemic against any company in town. We had a really dynamic culture that trusted each other, that worked really collaboratively, accomplished very complex projects like Studio Park, and did it while having a lot of fun, and we just really enjoyed each other. No question that the pandemic took a lot of wind out of our sails. We lost some key people. We had to put a lot of people on furlough as we were closed for nearly a year. We've got a lot of new people on our team. We're still working largely in a virtual environment. It's very difficult to try to figure out how to rebuild that team. And that's been one of the things that's been most important to me as a business leader. And so that's a challenge that I embrace, but I do lie in bed at night trying to wonder what that should look like, to try to find this balance, I think, between accountability and productivity versus the flexibility that I think that the workforce is looking for moving into the next generation. So the next thing that's keeping me up at night is, well, people. And by this I mean, as you all know, and there's probably other businesses represented here that are in a similar boat, staffing, particularly on our frontline hourly employees, is a real challenge. I used to joke that we would hire 3 people for every 100 applications we received at Celebration Cinema. And that made it twice as hard to get a job at Celebration Cinema as to get into Harvard, who had a 7% acceptance rate. We do not live in that world anymore at all. In fact, one of the biggest barriers that we have to recovery is not the fact that the audiences aren't willing to come back. We largely are stabilizing, and probably 80% or so of the audience that wants to come back is already coming back to movie theaters, and we're pretty stable with that. The challenge is that we actually can't be open about 20% of the time as a result of the fact that staffing in healthcare and hospitality and manufacturing and construction is a real challenge. And then there becomes a whole number of other challenges that are related to that. That puts pressure on wages, which causes you to need to reinvent your business model. That has a lot of impacts that I think everybody is trying to sort through right now. Then you take one member of your team and they catch COVID and you got to quarantine people. It results in just a lot of business disruption that we've never experienced before. And we and many others, I'm sure, in the community are struggling with a lot of these issues. We've had to completely reinvent the way that we think about how we hire. We used to say, if you can't work nights and weekends, sorry, that's what the job is. Now we're actually going to have a hiring campaign that says, we are specifically looking for people who want to work 11 to 5:30 on weekdays because we can't find anyone to work then. All of our students are typically in class at that time. So the model is changing, and we're changing how we hire and where we find our people as well. The third thing that's keeping me up at night, and this is probably the most serious, is, well, you've guessed it, people. We are in a different world than we were 2 years ago. And for someone who is in the business of gathering large groups of people together, that creates some very real challenges. We all saw this a few weeks ago with what happened between Chris Rock and Will Smith at the Academy Awards. If here's a guy that is set up to have the best night of his life at the height of his career and can't keep it together. And what's compelling about this story to me really has nothing to do with Will Smith. It has to do with the fact that wherever we were as a society with respect to mental health 3 years ago, and it was already headed in the wrong direction at that point, it has gotten worse. And we experience that on the front line every day. It is more challenging. The fuses are shorter. We are experiencing a group of young people that has had very little discipline over the last couple of years as a result of disruptions in their typical flow, and they just don't know how to act in the real world. And I say young people, the fact of the matter is it's not that different for adults. And that's led to all kinds of different community issues. The one that's popped up yesterday most obviously is the concern over what's happening downtown right now with expected protests as a result of the police shooting. These are tough times, and I won't get too much into that topic. It's a very complicated one and a tragic one. But if there's a call to action to this group, it's as a group of community leaders, we really need to step up and figure out how to support the organizations that are working on issues associated with mental health and community stability and building empathy and trust between people. If there's a second call to action, it's to go to the movies. But I also think that going to the movies provides you for an opportunity to get in a room with a group of strangers and experience something together that helps build empathy and trust and leads to community reconciliation. And so we feel that we have an important role to play in that sort of space as well. Now, the sexy question. In other words, what are we doing to stay relevant, to change? There are 3 key things, no big surprise there, that we are really focused on. The first is upgrades to our facilities. This is the big one, recliner chairs. I think you're going to expect to see pretty much every theater everywhere will have a conversion over the next couple of years, if they haven't already, to recliner chairs. Our chairs at Studio Park have heaters in the backs to keep you warm. Actually, it's usually necessary in the summertime, believe it or not, because of the air conditioning. We expect that Celebration North is close behind here. This summer, we're going to start a conversion to all recliners. We're over 60 or 70% converted at this point as a company. We're going to expect that to happen because clearly this is the number one thing that we get asked from our consumer base is, do you have recliners? The other big change we're focusing on, a complete reinvention of our food and beverage model. We have gone way beyond, at this point, a concession stand that sells popcorn and candy. We have wrap sandwiches, pizzas, burgers, salads. We've got a full kitchen in most of our theaters. We've got a full bar to complement it. With this, we've been able to, without raising prices on popcorn and candy, nearly double the amount of revenue that we receive per patron on food and beverage, which has given us a lot of opportunity to be able to weather the storm of decreasing attendance associated with pandemics and other things. It has been a real game changer for us. It's also led to changes in our service model. You can buy your tickets online. You can just show your phone and the QR code directly to our usher, walk directly to your seat without standing in a line. You can actually, unless people know this, you can actually do that with your food and beverage too. You can order it right on our mobile site, and 10 minutes later, someone's going to deliver it directly to your chair in the auditorium, and you can completely bypass the lines to create, there's certainly some health concerns associated with COVID and being in lines and things like that. that's been a real game changer for allowing us to be able to increase the level of service to our guests. And the third thing that we're focused on is programming. And this has been an evolution ever since the conversion to digital cinema projectors, which has given us the opportunity to pretty much put anything on the screen that we want to. If you want to throw a PowerPoint on a 60-foot screen, we can do that in a matter of seconds. We've already seen great success with things like the Metropolitan Opera and with some live sporting events, live concert events. I think you're going to expect to see a lot more of that moving forward, a lot more live sports. I think we might even have the opportunity to do some more actual content that you would traditionally see in the home market. Maybe we'll get to see Ted Lasso as it shows up in its next season on the big screen in a limited basis. We did some experimenting with Game of Thrones when that series ended. And it is true that we see that these fans that are passionate about this particular type of content, they want to see it with people who also love it in a crowded auditorium and cheer for the heroes and boo the villains. And so that's a big opportunity for us as we move forward. The other that you see on the screen here for our company specifically is that in the world of programming, the Studio Park project downtown has given us a really creative platform to be able to experiment with all kinds of new things. On the left, you see our outdoor piazza. It accommodates about 400 people for a seated event. It could be actually a couple thousand for a stand-up event. We designed this space with the intent of doing a lot of outdoor events there. If I'm being honest, I don't think that we thought that we would actually get to a lot of that for a couple of years as things were settling down and we had launched 6 new businesses at Studio Park. But the pandemic created us this opportunity where we had to pretty much pause everything else and experiment with what was possible in the one place where we could do stuff, which was outdoors. And so we developed a concert series called The Listening Lawn, and we intend to continue that with shows starting in June this year. We got a full slate of shows this summer. We're able to do outdoor movies, typically older cult classic movies or family film. We actually took that program over from the Downtown Development Authority that used to do the movies in the park. And we expect that as we move into the future, we'd like as much of what we're doing out here to actually be free to the general public. The problem we're really trying to solve is just to make it feel really comfortable for people who don't typically go to downtown Grand Rapids to have a reason to go down that's really easy to get in and out. We think that we solved that with our parking equation for moviegoers. It's free. It's actually the most convenient parking of any movie theater that we have as a result of the fact that it's covered and only a few steps away from the front door of the theater. So we're trying to use these programming really as an opportunity to bring people downtown. And the thing that I'm most excited about, it's probably the smallest piece of our business in terms of revenue, but it's been the most fun, is the listening room, which is this room that was not even a part of the original plan for Studio Park, but got inspired by a concert that I went to out of town that really made me feel like we need a venue like this in Grand Rapids where people who are, let's just say over 40, can sit down, listen to music the way that it's intended to be heard, not leave with their ears ringing, have a cocktail. Can I say that on Calvin's campus? Okay. Have a cocktail and just relax and enjoy really good music. We get great artists traveling, a lot of them Nashville-based that are taking a stop in Grand Rapids between Detroit and Chicago. And our aspiration here is actually for the musician to feel like this is their favorite place to play. We're going to make them sound really good. We're going to fill the room. We're going to give them a captive audience that actually cares about their music. And it's a much more intimate space with only 200 seats, which causes some vulnerability on stage that we see over and over again. People take some risks. They tell stories they don't usually tell. We're in the business of creating space where story happens, and so that plays really into what we're trying to accomplish. So that's been a lot of fun for us to play with. That's really where we're headed, I think, with the future of the movies. And that bonus question that I promised, are the studios really releasing movies now? And the answer is yes, they have been for almost a year now. We've got The Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore opens this week. I've got a long laundry list here. I'm not going to talk about all of them. But the point that I'm trying to demonstrate is over the next 3 months, there is a new wide release movie opening every week, sometimes 2 and 3. We've got The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which is Nick Cage playing Nick Cage in an action movie and looks absolutely hilarious. Doctor Strange 2 we talked about already in the beginning of May. Finally, after being pushed back about 16 times, we've got Top Gun Maverick. And I got to tell you, I have actually seen the first 13 minutes of this movie as a pilot myself. Just looks unbelievable. I think they are really going to deliver with Top Gun, Jurassic World Dominion, Lightyear, which is the next in a Pixar's line of movies. It's a backstory of the actual Buzz Lightyear character versus the toy. It actually looks very clever. Minions for the kids, that's in the Despicable Me franchise. The next big Marvel movie, Thor. And then in the next 3 months, we're closing it up with Where the Crawdads Sing, which will be a smaller title, but I think a lot of people are pretty excited about it based on New York Times best-selling book that has been very popular amongst its audience. So with that, I actually will open it up for questions. Bob.
Is this on? Ah, perfect. Who's got a question? You've got one. All right. Here, hang on.
I thought this was just a really interesting look at kind of the movies in the U.S., but like India's got a huge movie industry. How are they doing? And are there things that you're looking to Europe or India for additional inspiration?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, we'll put anything on the screen that we think that there's an audience that wants to see. That's kind of our MO. You mentioned India specifically. Just 2 weeks ago, we played the film RRR, which is a film out of Bollywood that is sort of a special release. It comes to us from a very different channel of distributors that has a very different business rules in terms of how they play, and there's some interesting stories in the background there. But there is very clearly an audience that would like to see a lot of that content in Grand Rapids. Our only obstacle in that is actually finding the right channels to get the right access to it. So we do have a few connections within that industry, and most of them are guys based in Detroit, and so it's been okay. It's been starting to refeed that pipeline. Interesting anecdote there. We called these guys up. We heard this movie, RRR, one of the biggest movies to hit India in a really long time, was coming out and said, hey, can we play this? And they looked at their notes and said, we see you've been blacklisted. And we said, what? What are you talking about? We've got a long history with you guys playing these movies mostly at our Woodland Mall location. And it says, well, apparently the guy that you were working with didn't pay his bill, and now, not someone who works for us, and now you've been blacklisted. We thought, well, thanks for telling us. We probably could have resolved this, and we did, and they put us back on the list. We're certainly trying to play, things that get some awareness in the Academy Awards, some of the Best Picture nominees for foreign language films. But our role really is to play what we think people want us to play. We take a lot of suggestions from members of the community that there's something on their radar that they'd like us to bring, and we almost always look into it and see if we can find an audience that wants to see it.
All right. Thank you.
JD, can you just talk for a minute about the business side of your business from a pandemic point of view? I mean, we're really blessed to have you as a business owner in this community. But what's gone on either in our local markets, more broadly, presumably you had to be fairly, financially strong to kind of survive this, and
Yeah.
some probably didn't. Has there been consolidation? Just talk to that a little bit.
Sure. What we're experiencing within our market in terms of traffic coming into our theaters is pretty much the same as what is being experienced across the country. In some way, it depends on the movie and the demographic that appeals to that movie. Some movies were playing better than others. That's always been true. Between March of 2020 and December 31st of 2020, we lost 93% of our revenue. The other 7% was pretty much at the Getty Drive-In, which was the only location which had a record year. And it had a record year playing Jurassic Park from 1994 for 16 weeks straight as our #1 movie. I mean, people want to get out of the house and do something, at least in the safety of their own car. So it was a absolutely devastating period of time for our industry, a lot of uncertainty. I remember in March of 2020 when we shut down for 2 weeks, and I was like, oh, man, that's going to be tough on us. But if it goes more like 2 months, which is looking more realistic, we're in really big trouble. And, 2 months turn into a year plus, and you just get super scrappy. You have to make incredibly tough decisions with respect to staffing. I would say from our perspective, a lot of government resources actually were very helpful to us to navigate this. There's no question about it. The unemployment insurance that was offered made it a lot easier for us to be able to furlough 95% of our staff and have them feel comfortable that they're taken care of, and were many of them ready to come back to work when we were ready to bring them back. That was very helpful. We found that we work in a business community full of partners, our law firms, our accounting firms, our bankers, who were just really stepped up. The climate in Grand Rapids for the sort of relationships that we have with our business partners really showed you who you're in business with and why we like to do business in West Michigan. We were able to restructure all of our debt. This is a little unique to our company. The other local company did not make it and went through bankruptcy and has a new owner now. But with Studio Park, we built all of these big risky assets like apartment buildings, office buildings, parking ramps. And ironically, those were doing phenomenally well. We're on a waiting list with our apartments and had some major contracts on the parking ramp and secured a real slam dunk of a tenant with Acrisure for our office building. And so the banks were willing to essentially move almost all of our debt to those assets and take some pressure off us. We're unique in our industry in that we own almost all of our theaters versus lease them. And so we do have a couple leases. Those are the most problematic places for us right now to continue to do business. And we're still sorting through the mess of some of that at Rivertown Mall in particular. So those are some real challenges. But the other way the government did actually step up, and a lot of really bipartisan support, was with the shuttered venue grants. They were really designed for live performance venues, and our lobbyists, the National Association of Theater Owners, was able to include movie theaters in this group of companies eligible for a revenue reimbursement based on lost revenue. And that in and of itself took way longer and a lot of anxiety to get across the finish line, but really puts us in a space where we feel pretty comfortable we're going to be able to recover nicely and start to reinvest in things like new chairs in a lot of our buildings.
All right, we've got a question over here.
Hi, JD. I'm Carl Planigan. I teach film and media here at Calvin.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you guys have been great supporters of our program. I want to thank you for that. Anyway, Is there any room for small movies in exhibition any longer? I mean, is there any way to make that a viable business model? I love the listening room, and it seems like the listening room is modeled after this kind of idea that we don't need a huge audience, and we're going to try to give you the best possible music. Is there any room for that in the area of movie exhibition?
Absolutely, and more so now. So the interesting thing that we've learned from the studios and all of their experience in the major releases is that the part of that market that is closing for us more is sort of those B or C titles, the wide release movies, but that don't have a huge audience. They're taking a lot of those and going directly to the streaming services. The indie films in particular, that creates a huge amount of opportunity for. And we've always tried to play indie films, but the typical model in our industry has been, if you want to play a picture, you need to play it for 2 weeks for 5 shows a day. And for a movie that doesn't have a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign behind it, it's really tough to get enough people to show up in order for that to work. So the way that we've approached this, and I give a lot of credit to Eric Kuiper, my colleague who runs our programming department, also a former Calvin student, is he's developed what's known as the Indie Film Series, and it's changing the entire business model to say, okay, we can't necessarily fill an auditorium 5 days a week or 5 times a day, 7 days a week with one of these titles. What we can do is develop a series, this independent film series, and play perhaps 6 titles will share that screen. And we're able to actually market and brand, kind of like a film festival, the series itself, so that the audience that's interested in those sorts of movies is able to know when the series is playing and where it's playing, and we can start to build an audience around that and find the direct connections to those audiences where we can reach out. And that's been very successful. We've actually found that that particular screen, when we format it that way, it can be one of our highest grossing screens in the complex based on mixing it with all of these titles. And he's a film lover, Eric is, and goes to a lot of film festivals, and he'll take a lot of the content that he sees at Sundance and Toronto and other places, and the titles that are getting some attention, and we really do try to bring them. Ironically, like one of the questions or complaints that we get from members of the community is, why didn't you play this title? And the response is usually, we did. No one showed up. And so it's been a little bit tough to do that. We also love when there's a local connection, either a partner that wants to spotlight something, as you've done with Calvin, or a local filmmaker that's bringing a movie to town and says, hey, I've got a lot of friends and family, will you do a showing or 2 showings of my movie so that I can do a Q&A afterwards for my audience here? We love to do that sort of thing, and we do it all the time. So I think there's actually a bigger opportunity for independent film and those that fall outside of the typical studio model than there ever has been in the past.
Great, thanks. We got a question right here.
Thanks for the presentation, JD. My question is about a lot of what you showed up here is pretty unique to Studio Park downtown. And as a family, we choose normally to drive from where we live, which has a theater across the highway from us, to go all the way downtown because I feel like there's more opportunities for some of that storytelling that you explained, the story with your father. What are the different things that you guys are thinking about doing or maybe are doing already to try to create that same type of atmosphere, that same type of experience for the majority of the other theaters that are, that don't have what Studio Park has or would be very difficult to replicate?
Yeah, it's it's a challenge. I think the best example of that is the theater that this room is probably most familiar with in Celebration North. And it's a difference in thinking. I think most theaters across the country were designed around the value of efficiency, and I'm all for efficiency, but that led to designing a lobby space in particular where you're trying to get people in and out of here as quickly as possible and kind of go through the line and get your popcorn and sit down, and then when the movie's over, we want to get you out of the building as quickly as possible. And so we're asking questions like, well, what if instead of getting people out of here as quickly as possible, we're trying to get them to stay as long as possible? And what does the revenue stream behind that look like? So a few years ago, right before the pandemic, we did a conversion of our lobby space at Celebration North to add a bar and seating area there, some soft seating and some couches, some areas that sort of encourage that idea of, you just watched your movie or you're about to watch your movie and you've got a few minutes to kill. Sit down, hang out, have a conversation, spend time with the people that you're here with, and see what that looks like. So other locations, it is more of a challenge. It looks like, some of the things we were just talking about, trying to be a good community partner. We've defined our sandbox as a company as anywhere we can drive to on a tank of gas. And we do that because we want to make sure that we're really present in our local communities where we own theaters. We have theaters from Benton Harbor to Mount Pleasant, Muskegon, Lansing, Kalamazoo. But we want to know our media partners. We want to know business leaders in those communities so that we can create events. Like there's an event this Thursday for a fundraiser for Spectrum Health and Make-A-Wish associated with the Fantastic Beasts movies. It's the 10th Wizards Ball that we've hosted. It's a little scaled back this year. But it's creating those sorts of opportunities through community partnerships to kind of add something to the event that gets people talking in addition to the content.